Well, my favourite has always been the Queen Mary, because that was the first big canal ship we worked on, and Queen Elizabeth was in a way a repeat to some extent. It wasn't a repeat, but still it was the second ship. And for my choice, the Queen Mary was always my favourite ship. I still think that the appearance of the Elizabeth improved on that of the Mary. I think in our designing of the Elizabeth, we did streamline the outward appearance quite a bit. But as a ship, I preferred the Queen Mary.
Cunard ran out of money, and they stopped building her. Now, I was in the Stock Exchange, and when the Queen Mary stopped, you would really have thought we'd been defeated in a war. I mean, the prices collapsed. It was, you know, the whole of the country felt it. When they started building 534 again, recovery had come, and the stock market did that. Up it went. Now, all this has been forgotten, but she really was the flagship of Britain, and the idea of her, there wasn't enough money to build her, you know, it was an absolute disgrace. You know, of course, it all came right, and Bob's your uncle.
My father wanted to go out to America to visit his parents and his brother and sisters who emigrated in 1913, and he booked on the maiden voyage of the Queen Mary, and he took me with him.
I got hold of my little friend Joey here. First, I said, "Joe, come have a coffee." So we went into what a little, it's a long room, known as the long room in Throgmorton Street, where we sat down, and I said, "Joe, like to come to America?" He said, "Yes." "When?" I said, "Well, we'll just sort of, you know, see what we can do." We got talking, and then Joe said, "The Queen Mary's sailing in about a month's time. Let's see if we can get on her." So we went to a telephone, got on. Well, they just laughed at us. They said, "My God, she's been booked up for years. We haven't hope in hell." So we said, "Oh, well, thank you very much indeed." Went back on the floor of the house, and I was talking to another broker and trying to make the big importance I expect. I said, "Well, I just hoped I might get to America on the Queen Mary, but of course they're full." He said, "Well, perhaps they are, but my brother is with Cunard, and he's the chap in charge of the booking." He said, "Get on the phone to him, tell him you've spoken to me, and see what he can do." So straight up on the telephone, got this chap, and he said, "Well, of course I think he's absolutely booked, but if I get any cancellations, I'll let you know." I said, "Well, hang on a bit, I can't afford first class or anything like this. You know, it'll have to be a reasonably priced voyage." So he said, "Oh, okay, I'll make it out." Now, of course, I thought that was the end of it. But within a fortnight, he rang me and said, "I've got a cancellation, tourist class, it's a four-man cabin, but two men have withdrawn. Would you like to take it?" I said, "Well, just a minute." Went to see Joe, and we took the thing. And this was only, I should think, about a fortnight before she sailed.
When the Queen Mary came down, we were transferred, some of us were transferred from the Aquitania to the Queen Mary, I being one of them, a bellboy. Well, we were called bellboys, but in our discharge books it's messenger this and different jobs you get, but it's still basically a bellboy. We went on what they call the old one-day breakdown trial out before the maiden voyage, you know, with all the big wigs there were. Couldn't have had any more on board, otherwise we would have sunk. We decided that we would take Joe's car. Now, Joe had
a little sports car which was known as a Riley Imp. And we drove down from London. I think we left early in the morning because the thing had to be hoisted aboard. It wasn't like a drive-on ferry or something. It had to be hoisted up and was put in the hold. And actually it was quite interesting because there were a number of other cars going, but of course they were all Rolls Royces and these very big cars of that time. And here was our little sports car going up through it. When we left Southampton, I think the whole of this world had come to see us all the way down Southampton Water. Both sides were absolutely crowded with spectators waving, and you couldn't hear them shouting too far out. And we were surrounded by hundreds of boats. And they stayed with us for quite considerable time. And one by one, they just dropped off. But it was a wonderful experience. It's a thing I've never forgotten.
Main thing was that, you know, you got the work to do, the passengers there paying their fare, and they wanted a good time. So we did everything we could to make them really comfortable. We thought that was our job.
No, my father, he went off and enjoyed himself. And I was left to myself most of the time. And I really had a wonderful time because on the maiden voyage, the whole ship was open to everybody. You could wander into the first class, tourist class, so on. And it was only on the maiden voyage that happened. And I really spent all my time, I think, exploring. I was certainly quite overwhelmed by the splendour of all the furnishings and the decorations in the rooms. I had some beautiful swimming pools on board. The only thing I found about the swimming pool was that the Queen Mary, when she was crossing the Atlantic, and we had one or two rough days, and it was somewhat difficult trying to swim in a pool with them because the water going all over the place.
Trip on the Queen Mary must have made a terrific impact on him, because he, not only the film that he showed extensively, but he's collected so many things. As you can see here, there are first of all early letters, these beautiful stamps which are from the sent to the passenger on our MS Queen Mary, and this one is to Cherbourg Docks, so that caught him after the first few hours. I'm very proud of this, actually, because 3 kisses actually sent to my father by me. I wasn't very big at the time, had some help. There are other letters from his bank manager saying that he was of good character and that he could have £50 to spend while he was away. But the whole voyage only cost £37 and 5 shillings. And for that, you had all your food, you had a tour of New York, comprehensive sightseeing tour of the city, and a visit to the observation tower of the Empire State Building, a well-known cabaret, and a ticket for Radio City Music Hall Cinema, the world's largest entertainment centre. And he obviously made use of all these things because we have the catalogues and the brochures and all the papers pertaining to New York, and of course for the journey. The quality of the food, if it's as good as it sounds, must have been absolutely mouth-wateringly good, and they catered for all fads and fancies and dietary needs. So if you were diabetic or vegetarian, There was certainly no problems, there was plenty of choice. The film was so expensive in those days, and with the handheld cameras, it only lasted for a few minutes for each reel. So to take any long shots, you had to make sure that it was near the beginning of the film, otherwise you got a break after about 2 minutes. These mementos will always be a reminder of endeavour and achievement and excellence. It's brought a lot of it back to me, my father's enthusiasm, and it's all fresh again, and it must have been wonderful.
It was a very fine morning, and there was a very slight mist on the sea ahead of you, and so that you couldn't see the actual sea. But what you could see as you came up the Hudson were the skyscrapers of New York above the mist. They looked just like castles in the sky.
When we arrived off New York, the first thing that happened were 1 or 2 aeroplanes coming out to buzz us, and it wasn't long before there was literally an armada of ships coming out, and New York went absolutely mad. I've never heard such noise in all my life. 50 or more aeroplanes all buzzing around, small ships, Hudson River ferry boats, fire floats with their hoses going. It really is something. I think anybody who's been on one of those big liners that used to cross Atlantic will remember the New York greeting.
There was a tremendous crowd waiting on the quay. There was a special Cunard quay, which I think had been built for the Mary. And with the tugs came alongside and quietly nudged her in. And we went ashore.
We were presented with this plaque, and I really treasure that.
All the crews from that ship came from the older ships, which the old Aquitania, the Berengaria. So that's how the crews were made up for the ship. They couldn't take all the crew from one ship because the other ships were still going. So they took them from all around, all the experts and all the best, what they, I presume, what they thought are ideal. And I think us bellboys were only selected because of our size. We were all short. I'm still am short. And mind you, I lost a bit of height, so all the running I used to do running around on the ship. Wore myself out.
I joined the Queen Mary for the first time in 1938, so that I was on her when she made her record crossing, and I was still serving on board the Queen Mary when war broke out in 1939. And the war was declared on the 11th on the Sunday, and we pulled into New York Harbor on the early morning of Monday the 12th of September. So it was not, and nobody could decide at that time what to do with the Queen Mary, because she was too large and too valuable to return to England, where she would have become a target for German bombers. So, and it wasn't, though it was intended to use her as a troop ship, no definite job for her had yet been found. So I spent the first 6 months of the war living in the equivalent of a luxury hotel, 10 minutes walk from Radio City, and being very well entertained by my American friends, while my poor wife at home was suffering from blackouts, evacuees, air raids, and that sort of food rationing, all that sort of thing.
I've never actually sailed on the Queen Mary since. I have only visited her on the 50th anniversary. But there was one incident in 1942. I was in the army then, and I was on a troop convoy. I was on the liner Windsor Castle. I think it was about the 3rd of June, and there was great excitement. There was a large ship steaming towards us and going at great speed. And as it came closer to us, and I suppose it probably passed us about 2 or 3 miles away. It was the Queen Mary. I think she was called the Grey Ghost in those days. She painted all grey. And it was really a beautiful sight to see her steaming at about 30 knots, completely unescorted.
My father made the certain fittings on the Queen Mary, and also door furniture and various other bits and pieces, mainly on the electrical side.
I came in contact with Queen Mary because after the war there was so much refitting of ships and things like that that they decided they wanted somebody to help the installer of the clocks where I worked at Mercer's in St Albans to have help because they had to have 2 teams out. And therefore I got press gang into doing that. I was transferred from those departments to that for a few months.
I think it was the restaurant on Sea Deck where they had a model map of the Atlantic Ocean with the United States and England at either side, and it had a crystal model of the Queen Mary that actually moved across, and one could tell where we were and how many miles we'd done each day.
The jumper movement worked a pulley which pulled a cord across, and the ship was in a slot, and every minute, I think it was, the jumper jumped, and actually the ship moved over just that fraction more. There was an adjustment panel fitted on the side or on the back side, I think it was, of it, where they could put it back or put it forward according to how they were at, say, midnight.
My father got involved with the main pylons, as they were called. That was in the main dining hall. His fittings were more or less central. There was 2 of them originally, and they were made from a bronze that wouldn't tarnish, because being at sea, seawater would do that sort of thing. And they were 11 foot tall, seeing the height of the dining room as it was then was almost 22 feet. And they were made in a small factory in North London, and all put together and then taken apart again and shipped down to Southampton, where they were installed on the ship itself. At a later date, not much later date, when she came into Southampton because there was vibration problems, my father had to go down there and reset all the glass in special packing pieces added to the fittings to stop the vibration.
She was just like a stately home with all the art, the furniture, everything. I mean, it was lovely. It really was. And the artwork, they had the very best artists, the best sculptors. Everybody had contributed to it.
We went on board, saw the pylons, which were in the main dining hall, and then we went to the first class dance room, you might as well call it. It was a small stage, and my father sat down at the piano and played, and he said, "What's the fitting?" So I watched the fitting in the centre of the room, which was made out of Czechoslovakian drops, glass drops, and it changed colour. And as he played from a waltz to a quick step, so it changed quicker. And as a lad of 10, you know, I was enthralled. It's really a bygone age.
Yes, it.
That's what I say. I mean, nobody would go to those lengths nowadays, and you wouldn't get that sort of work either.
There's no, there's not the craftsmen
No.
nowadays to there's never been at a Queen Mary.
I was doing a Blackpool summer season with the Army game, which was a forerunner of Dad's Army thing, and we were playing to packed houses, and my manager, who's my musical director then, he greeted me when I came home one evening after the show and said, by the way, would you like to go to New York? And I said, I haven't even thought about it. He said, well, you're going anyway. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you're going on the Queen Mary with Giraldo's full orchestra, and you're going to record 13 broadcasts for the BBC called Tip Top Crossing. And he said, you'll be leaving in October. And I couldn't believe it. I thought he'd pulling my leg. And summer season finished, and I think within a week or two, I was off down to Southampton, because I was living in Golders Green then. And I just couldn't believe it. With Giraldo and the full band, and Brian Matthews was doing the comparing. Jimmy Grant, who was mainly a jazz producer then, producer of jazz programs, he was then into music with big bands and everything, and he produced the show, and he was on board with 2 engineers. And they brought their wives as well. It was a lovely one. We travelled first class, so we were in that gorgeous dining room, you know, and really, it was really wonderful. What an experience. We had this enormous shopping mall, you know, which is a very tastefully done one, and it was lovely. And then you go down to cabin class, you see in the next one, and it was just the vastness of it. And that dining room that I ate in, well, it was like a cathedral. They have called it like a church, haven't they? And that great, beautiful mural at one end. Everything was top class, you know, everything was top class. And I've looked since at the books, you know, with the photographs in, that how it was first built and how the people were working on it, and everything was done, the designers. And you can see that the quality that went into that ship from end to end, stem to stern, was just unbelievable. I don't think you get that kind of quality these days. I remember being very sick the first morning. I went fast asleep and got up in the evening ready for dinner. I didn't want it, but the restaurant manager had suggested that I had tripe and onions. And I thought I couldn't think of anything more horrible. He said, no, this is a regular thing for seasickness. He said that we advise all passengers who suffer from seasickness to have this for their first meal. He said, and it'll line your stomach, it'll quell the storm within, you see. And it did. I went down to the engine room, and of course went down to the old famous Pig and Whistle. You know, that was quite an experience. It was tradition for any stars who were any entertainers to go down there at least visit once on the trip, you see. And if you didn't, you were a bit of a bad egg. It was wonderful. They actually were sitting on the struts of rafters, you know. When they say swinging from the rafters, they were. They were all crowded in there. They were appreciative. And we gave them the full works, you know, and the microphone, and I sang a couple of songs. And yes, it was wonderful.
I suppose I was about 10. I was about 10. It was first of all, it was just the pure size of her. I mean, when you're a small kid, and it's magnified that much more. And it was, I used to go down because my family had a business in the docks, and I used to go down. I was about 10 or 12 and wander down by the side of the quay when she was alongside, and really stand and chat to the guys who used to loading all the food on board. I remember the thing that always used to fascinate me were these big boxes of live lobsters, and it was a great fun down there, because then you, as a kid, they come along and sort of wave these lobsters at you, and take the elastic bands off the pinchers, and they had these the conveyor belts similar to what they have today. But it seemed to me it was this amazing amount of food, was never-ending sort of conveyor belt of food going on, all different sorts. And as a kid, it was just a wonderful place to sort of stand around and be part of it. And I do that quite regularly. It was the Saturday thing to do, you know, when you were a kid. And then I started Saturday work for my father, who was connected with the old Unistyle Laundry in Southampton. Now, the vast part of the Unistyle Laundry's work was connected with the liners, Union Castle, Cunard, and also a lot of the passenger ferries going back and forwards from France. And of course, I used to work up there Saturday mornings, and we used to do a lot of the soft furnishings and all the chef's uniforms, the whole gamut of things. And then one day, I was told, well, I can go down on the ship, which was, I used to stand aside, you know, for all these years, and then at last to get on there was absolutely, I can remember it now. I had to shampoo carpets, and you got on this thing, and I remember looking down a corridor, it seemed like, you know, 3 miles long, and off I went on a Saturday shampooing the carpets, and it was from that really, it just hooked me. It was just this wonderful atmosphere of being on this floating hotel with this great sort of feeling of grandeur and size, and it sustained with me. Then when I left school and started college, I joined W.H. Smith's in the docks, who had at that time had a shop in there, because in those days, and that would be the sort of early 60s, the docks were, you know, zinging along quite well. There were all these guys down there, and there was florists, there was bankers and banks, and it was a great atmosphere. And of course, you could always go down there and spot the stars as they went through, you know. Norman Wisdom, I remember selling a Daily Express to. I remember seeing Charlton Heston and people like that. All these great stars would go through. And then we also used to go on board the ship, because Smiths had a shop on board, and we also had the role of providing magazines, books for the library on there. So again, it was a chance to go back on board. I think the Queen Mary is something very special for the people of Southampton, and still is. I mean, it may be, I suppose now, nearly 30 years since she left, but we know at the Echo we've only got to carry a story about the ship and about the days she was operating in and out of the port. And the response from our readers is really phenomenal. I mean, we get dozens and dozens of letters, whether it's from ex-crew people, whether it's people who travelled on her, who had relatives serving on her, or perhaps just stood on and saw her go that day back in 1967. I really think that she is unique to the people of Southampton. Sadly, when the Ocean Terminal went, of course, all this went with it, and a great shame, a great shame.
A long time ago, when I was about 6 or something, went to a friend's house on Western Shore, and I said I wanted to go down Western Shore, and I was only little. Anyway, till we came out of our friend's house, it was raining, and I appealed to my mum to take me down there. We went down, and we couldn't work out why there was all this traffic around. We thought, it's a bit strange. But then the QE2 came out of her berth all alight, and sailed past really majestically, and she just sparked something from then. And then, researching into that, I found Queen Mary, and it's just went from there. It's just amazing to see how big they were, the size, the interior, everything else. It's pretty amazing. I collect mainly the china, that's what I like, that was actually used on board the ship, so people can relate to that in a way. I can, you know, who drank from that cup, you know, Winston Churchill or whatever. The glasses, the tables, fittings. I have quite a few fittings from the actual ship herself. Did some research and then found out that they did a whole cube tea set, and just the style was so deco. And I love the style of the 30s. I thought, oh, I've got to have one of them. So just been trying to get piece by piece, gradually, and starting to build up now. If you compare it to modern ships like the Oriana, other modern ships, she just got something completely different. She had character, and I think that's something nothing produced in the past 20 years has had. And she just related to so many people in Southampton. It was just such an emotion when she came in. And I suppose that I was born in the city, so I was sort of sharing that emotion, even though I never saw her in the docks. It's basically affected my whole life. Every weekend I do antique fairs to raise money for my collection. And I'd like to have the biggest collection of Queen Mary items in the whole world one day. But at the moment I'm quite contented with what I have got. And pieces are being brought to me now, which is really nice. In May this year, I have the chance to actually go on the ship. First time I've ever seen it, so it's my lifelong ambition And I've got lots of photos of the ship. Just be interesting to compare them then and now. I've got original deck plans, and it'd be interesting to see what has actually been done to certain areas. So areas like the second-class swimming pool, for instance, just to see what is left, and hopefully see what original furniture's left, because a lot of it was sold off, but there are still bits here and there that are original, and the joy of that will be trying to find what's where and where it should go.
It all started back in 1919 when Frederick Belmont opened his first Betty's in Harrogate in North Yorkshire, and it opened to instant and international acclaim. We had crown princes and princesses coming from all over Europe to Harrogate to take tea at Betty's. And Frederick decided that he was going to have to open up more Betty's. So for the first 15 years, he built his empire of tea rooms. And then I think his wife said, enough's enough, we need a holiday. And Frederick Belmont never did anything by half, whether it was having nice silver teapots for his tea rooms or the best musicians to entertain his customers. So he decided for his first holiday he was going to book first-class tickets on the maiden voyage of the Queen Mary. That was his dream. Once he boarded the Queen Mary, I don't think it was a holiday at all. He spent most of the voyage making copious notes. He just loved the Queen Mary. He was entranced by its lavish interior, its majesty, and I think he had a real eye for detail. That was one of the reasons his own business had been so successful. And right from the start he decided that his new tea room in York was going to look like the Queen Mary. So he spent most of the voyage going around with a notepad making notes on how the panels looked, how the stained glass was, and when he got home he decided he was going to recreate the Queen Mary in his new tea room. When Frederick Belmont returned to dry land, he immediately phoned the interior designers that had fitted out the staterooms on the Queen Mary and asked them if they would come up to Yorkshire and fit out his new restaurant. He wanted to recreate that luxury on board the liner, and as a centrepiece he wanted a marquetry picture. One of the things that had caught his eye on board were the wonderful wooden marquetry pictures that you can see, and he wanted those as a centrepiece to his new restaurant. Indeed, he was so excited by the prospect he tracked down the artist Charles Spindler and his son Paul in France and asked them to come over, and he ended up with not one but 6 Spindler marquetry pictures for his new restaurant. We still have very strong links with the Spindler marquetry studio in Alsace in France. It's 3rd generation now, but over the years, since Betty's in York opened in 1937, we've built up the collection of marquetry pictures, and we have what we think is the world's largest private collection here in Harrogate, and it's all thanks to the Queen Mary.
Well, my father, who was berthing the vessel as first-class berthing officer, was given the job by Cunard to do the whole berthing of this particular thing, chartered by the News of the World. And of course it was a huge competition in its time, 6-day holiday down to Las Palmas, and I think he did a good job. And at the end of it they sort of said, would you like to take you and your family? So little 9-year-old John went toddling off to Southampton with the family and joined the ship. It was about 2 or 3 days into the voyage, just crossing the Bay of Biscay, we hit a force 8. That was about the 23rd, 24th of December 1965, and the sea just got heavily, worse and worse and worse and worse. And by about lunchtime on that particular day, the seas were really very, very heavy, and we were taking 45-foot waves, and then this immense freak hit us. At about, I think it was about 75 feet, and it smacked on to just 3/4 on the ship, and she went right over. And of course we were in this dining room which was sparsely populated because everybody else was being sick. I wasn't, my father wasn't, and everybody went, I think. There was things flying everywhere, there was waiters, food, including me, and father picked me up because I was only a young lad, and he picked me up and put me back. And the ship sort of stayed on her side for quite a while, or it felt quite a while. And there was a few sort of groans, shouts and things. And then the whole vessel started to vibrate. And Father looked at me and he said, "Oh, she's fine now, she's vibrating." And she was juddered and she came straight back up and of course took a list over the other side. And once again, she was absolutely perfect again. The damage that was done was one of the ventilator shafts was ripped off. And one of this very heavy sea had hit the forward observation deck. And that had splintered glass, and we had a couple of passengers who weren't supposed to be there, but people always go, don't they? And they were actually injured with flying glass.
Gradually towards the end, in the last 2 to 3 years of the voyage, as the passenger numbers had definitely declined, but we still probably hadn't seen that the vessel would finish. The Queen Mary was, in a way, like the inevitable ship which we tended to think would go on forever. We were actually, towards the end of our career, in full competition with 707s, which were then the medium of crossing the Atlantic, and of course business people would want to actually fly and get there quicker. Towards the end, we actually adopted a cruising mode, of which we cruised to Las Palmas. 6-day Christmas cruises come to mind, and even a few other short duration cruises. But of course, because of the draft of the Queen Mary, one would be anchored some distance offshore, and then it was a question of ferrying backwards and forwards in the boats to get everyone ashore that needed or wanted to go. One of the things that will always be in my mind, as it will be just about any other engineer who's ever sailed on the ship, would be number 5 boiler room and the temperature of number 5 boiler room and how hot it would be in the summer months. It took its air supply for this closed boiler room stokehold from the generator which was forward of it, and the temperature ranges would be well in excess of 100 degrees. A 4-hour watch and 8 off, you really were like being into a sauna on a permanent basis. We had one for...
The disc is scratched, I think.
facility.
Come on.
The boiler room. The nice.
See if I could get it to work. Damn it.
Cold water tap, but of course if you took ice cold water in these sort of temperatures, cramp would very soon take place. So it was one of really keeping the various firemen and the greasers and the trimmers aware of the fact that whilst they may feel thirsty and dehydrated, they were better off with a cup of water and some salt tablets rather than a few pints of ice cold water, although I'm sure they made up for it.
Hello? Hi, Kai. What's up? How are you? How are you, buddy? Kai. How was your birthday?
And they got off watch. It was a necessity.
Her grandfather, he was cruise steward for 25.
Oh, I think the video's over with.